Bless you.
All right, I'm gonna call the roll for the work session. Mr. Rich, Dr. Houghton,
Here.
Mr. Farley, Mr. Fink,
Here.
Mr. Green. Here. Dr. Holliday,
Here.
Mayor Bazell.
Here.
All right, so we do have a quorum, but just a reminder, this is a work session. Council's not gonna be voting on anything, so that should be the last vote you hear today. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate seeing people in the room. This is the first in a series of meetings, so hopefully we get more folks along the way. We are streaming this and it will be on our YouTube page. So today, we're kicking off, I think, a series of meetings. Some of the dates are still TBD for council to do kind of a comprehensive look at today's STR regulations, how they're functioning, and identify changes they want to make. Take those proposals for change, identify metrics to be studied, have it studied, and come back and look at the results. We want to change this. This is how we propose to change it. This is what the study says that will do. Yes or no, are we going to do it? But before we get to that part, we're going to rewind it all the way back to today, and we're just going to go through the history of STR regulations on Folly Beach. So today, we're not debating the cap, discussing the impacts of the cap, identifying problems with current regulations. We're just going to be looking at the history of STR regulations to see how we got here today. We will be scheduling extra meetings, which I'm going to go over in the next slide. And our goal is to get all this done well ahead of the 2027 business license year, so that if any changes are made, we have adequate time to get ourselves ready in the building, change any processes that need to be changed functionally, but also to get the word out in the community. So kind of main point of the intro is this is the first meeting, hopefully of several meetings, so please plan to stay engaged. On the next one, Wes.
And just to be clear, the end result of this will be a study by a third party, so we can have objective results to evaluate all the proposals that will come up in the next few months. So that's our main goal for this.
And that's what this slide is. This is kind of a proposed skeleton outline of how we think the review structure is going to go. Of course, council can combine some of these if they want to. The only thing that's for certain is that we're here today for the general history of STR regulations. And basically, we're going to go through all the ordinances that have been passed related to short-term rentals since 2010, which is when the first kind of big change happened. And in that review, we'll identify why each one of those ordinances was passed. And as we get into the later stuff, we'll go through and identify some proposals that did or did not make it into what currently exists today. After we do that, and council and the public has all had a chance to kind of digest the journey and evolution of regulations, we're going to have a meeting to look around and say, okay, we all know how we got here. We all know what it is. What do we not like about the current state of things? I think everybody in this room has an opinion about the current state of the STR ordinance. The last 5 years at this point has been constant flow of information and opinions about the current STR ordinance. Not saying there's nothing new, but I believe we've probably got an idea of all the major areas of concern, but we will always take public comment for that next meeting for folks to resubmit their thoughts on how things are today and what they'd like to change. And when we get closer and we know when that meeting date is, we'll do a good promotion to take public comment. And at that meeting, I want council to really narrow it down. Okay, we've heard from everyone for years. We've heard from everyone last week. What are the areas of concern that we think need to be adjusted? Is it the cap on the rentals? Is it where rentals are allowed? Is it the ability to transfer a property with a license? What are the exact functional concerns that we want to study? And once there's a agreed upon consensus about what areas of the current ordinances may need to be amended or changed, we're going to come back and we're going to identify specific proposals to address those things. I'm hesitant to name any hypothetical example because it's just a hypothetical example, but one of the areas of concern are licenses in the commercial districts closer to Center Street. So if that's been identified, we want council to settle on specific proposals. We will allow licenses in the commercial district, but we will offset it by lowering the cap in the residential district. Or we will allow licenses in the commercial district and not offset it on specific things. Once we know what we're studying, what we're proposing to fix it, we're gonna hire someone to say, hey, if we implement this change, how will it affect X, Y, and Z? And that's kind of the problem with the STR study. Everyone wants to do an STR study, but no one yet has articulated what we're studying. So working through that example, we want to address licenses in the commercial district. We want to allow licenses in the commercial district and lower the cap. If we do that, how will it affect real estate values in the commercial district? How will it affect the total number of licenses and city income? We have to identify the metrics tied to each proposed solution. We're gonna hire someone to do that, and they're gonna come back and say, these are the effects of your proposed solutions. Council will look at those effects, and with your help, decide if that's what they want to do. So that's our overall plan. Council, any thoughts or suggestions on that process?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we can preordain every question that's gonna be asked upon the RFP for the vendor to analyze. And there'll have to be some independent, the term independent means it has to be independently analyzed as well to look at the economic impact of the cap as well. So we're gonna have to, yes, we're gonna have to guide them with an RFP that allows them to understand things they should look at, but we're not gonna preordain solutions or even questions or even answers for them to say yes or no. They need to be able to do an independent study as well.
Correct. And what I'm referring to is you just said economic impact. What's your definition of economic impact? Is that
Simple.
trickle down employment? Is that city revenue? Is that personal real estate income?
Anything
Is it
that
business
touches,
license income?
simple, anything that's touched the supply and demand, the economic impact on the homeowners, the property owners, and the effect of the cap over the course of the last 3 years. So there has to be some kind of a due diligence on the downstream impact of that economic effect of, the implementation of the cap, good, bad, or ugly, whatever it is. Somebody has to do some kind of due diligence and look at the overall impact of those pieces. Now, there's myriad, there would be myriad factors to consider, and you mentioned some of them, okay? But also property values, real estate transactions, things that occur that are directly related to the effect on the values of property as well. So we need to do there has to be some kind of due diligence on that economic impact.
All right, so Dr. Holliday, I think just highlighted an important thing the council needs to clarify kind of from the beginning. Dr. Holliday is referencing a study on the impact of cap. I am referencing a study on how the proposed changes today's baseline. Dr. Holliday is referring to a pre-cap baseline. I'm referring to a 2026 baseline. So things are what they are today in 2026. You guys are going to propose changes to that, and I am proposing that the most effective study would be how your proposed changes affect today's environment. We already know to a certain extent what changed since 2023 to 2026. And certainly the study can sum that. But look, changes you make to the ordinance today aren't going to be related to real estate values in 2021. They're going to be related to real estate values in 2026. So what, and this is for council, this is an important philosophical point that council needs to settle. Are you looking at studying how your proposed changes relate to how things were in 2021? Or are you looking at how your proposed changes will change the conditions that exist today?
I think Blair brought up a good set of metrics. Those are the kinds of metrics I want to apply to any of the solutions that are proposed during this conversation. So if we propose X, what are the ramifications for real estate values, community, those types of things? And just identifying the metrics that we want to look at would probably be a great way to start. To me, I want to apply something evenly across all areas.
I understand, but we can't just assume it's status quo. moving forward. We have to look at the residue of the decision and what's happened from that point forward as well. I'm just saying part of the study should include a complete forensic analysis on what the economic impact has been from 2021 to 2026. Or when the referendum was passed in 2023 to today. There has to be some kind of metrics to look at what's changed. Good, bad, different, doesn't matter. Things haven't changed, things have changed. This is we've got to have data to show that in fact that there was some kind of change that occurred, we know, and then whatever that might be. Now I agree with the mayor that we have to put some kind of guardrails in place in terms of what the kinds of things they should be looking at, and Aaron, I agree. But we can't preordain a decision saying, the status quo, what should we do now? Because we can't look at what to do now unless we've looked at the impact over the last 3 years. That's my opinion.
And certainly not to say that that wouldn't be a component of it, but just, I want to make, because we need to be crystal clear moving forward. The main focus isn't to look back and say, what did the CAP do? The main focus is, the CAP did X. We've identified, the study will identify what the CAP did, but the CAP did this, it got us to here. If we do something else, what will that do? The big complaint with the CAP is that it was implemented without looking at the possible effects. So if we change the rules now, we need to look at what those changes will do versus now. So yes, certainly the study will say 23-3 CAP passed, got us to 2026, this is what happened. This is how things are in 2026. If you change X, Y, and Z, this is how things will change based on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think any kind of analysis is going to look at the past to inform future decisions.
Right.
So I think that'll be inherent in the calculus of whoever does the study.
They're not necessarily exclusive of each other.
No,
I mean,
right.
I think
They're
that's
not.
Doc's point, is that
Yeah.
if you say you're gonna look forward, that doesn't mean you can't look back. But is your position that that makes it too broad
I'm
of a
saying
study?
that the primary focus, I want to hear from council, what's your primary focus? Determining what happened between 23 and 26? Or should that be chapter 1, and then there's chapter 2, of what's gonna happen in 2027 if you make a difference?
You can't decide where you're going unless you know where you've been.
Correct, I'm asking for the I'm not saying we'll ignore it.
Okay.
I'm saying we will ask them, look at this, but the main focus, tell us how we got here and what happened. And then tell us what will happen if we do something else.
And that should be the outcome of the study. The outcome of the study should be what happens now moving forward. Historically, we've got to take it into context. We get that. We know why you're here, Blair. We understand that brings the continuity of both sides of what happened and now what goes next. We are where we are. We know what the consequences have been, positive or negative, of the initial referendum and the passing. Now we need to say, given the current economic circumstance, given the current opportunity to make changes to the ordinance, that's what we want to do, what's the effect going to be for us moving forward in the environment that we're sitting in now? The current economic situation, the current interest rates, the current inflation. What are we going to do here that's going to enable the city to benefit, the community to benefit, the businesses to benefit from now forward? We can't focus on the past. We take it into consideration. It's part of our data points, but let's move toward how do we and what's the impact of making changes moving forward. That's the outcome of the study, in my opinion.
I agree with Councilman Fink. The issue here is you can't determine and predict the future unless you've looked at the past. And you have to have some kind of a forensic analysis on the patterns and trends of what's occurred since the inception. Good, bad, or ugly. Again, we're not, nobody's throwing any babies out of the bathwater here, but good, bad, or ugly. And then what are those pieces that influence the predictive analysis on what the future might look like, both now, historically, as well as going forward. So to me, again, I agree with the councilman that in fact we do have to have some guardrails in place to make whatever changes, if any, that need to be made. But at this point, I don't think we can throw the history books out without making a decision.
But that can be
No one,
civil
and
as
to be
well.
clear, no one's proposing to throw the history
Yeah.
books out.
Yeah.
But we're just determining the primary focus. We'll use past information to influence the future, but this is a nice preview of meeting 1, 2, 3, 4. So on the STR bid study meeting, please, everyone attend. But that is just a question I want everyone to think about as we move through.
Well, being one that actually professionally lived their life academically with studies, analysis, things of that nature, we've all said the same thing, maybe in a different way, as far as we're saying the same thing. You know, and the outcome is going to be the outcome, because it is going to be data-driven. And to me, the details later on is when we begin, you know, as far as the research goes. Is it 2020, so on and so forth. And the other good news, when you select a professional in the field of study, then that will dictate the outcomes. That third party, once we give the data as a city, whatever the case may be, or the national data, that is untouched, it's quantifiable, and it has no bias in it. So if we select, which we will, the professional, that will move us forward, because nobody has any idea statistically about it, and that's the beauty of it. Because those findings will be clear, they'll be concise, there'll be third-party study, and there'll be involvement, not just from the council. I mean, look at the turnout today. That is also what I want to say is, you are sitting in the audience, the community is here, the data is coming from you as well, whether it be quantitatively or qualitatively.
And I want, again, I'd like just to restate what the mayor said, that he's determined that we, as a council, will be performing an independent, third-party, outside study. It won't be composed of people from this island. It won't be composed, we may have data from people from this island, clearly. It wouldn't be maybe data from the citizens, and maybe data from the owners, the stakeholders, and the property owners, and maybe even folks who obviously have, have some, let's just call it, impact, have been impacted by this. But that isn't gonna be necessarily the only piece of the data that's driving the decisions. An independent analysis will look at the complete topography of what's happening, and also the nation, okay? What's happening, the patterns and trends across the nation. And, we don't have to go into that right now, but there has to be some kind of at least forensics, historical, and then as you said, as Councilman Fink said, let's put the baseline down, let's go forward, let's figure out what we're gonna do based on the information we have. But it will not be driven by a consensus meeting of this council, either of this council for that matter, or for the citizens. It has to be independent. That's what he's agreed to. And so, and again, I respect that tremendously, because we could all cherry pick things that we think need to be changed, or we can just dig in and let somebody independently tell us what it is.
All right, any other comments on the overall structure of the review? Okay, Wes?
Oh, yes. So a
Sorry.
couple people have said, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ms. Stoller, this is a work session?
Oh, I thought you said any comments, so.
No, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, when I say comments, I mean from council.
And if you want to email me or
I
whatever, that'd be
But
great.
that, yeah.
At what point do we comment, or do we just send emails?
Send emails this week. We're gonna have a session for public comments, and everything's TBD at this point with the date.
This is the beginning of the beginning.
Thank you.
And just go on that. Today is really gonna be a pretty dry recitation of STR regulation history. So, thank you all for coming. But that's that first slide.
What are the rest of the issues that have been going on that have not been addressed, that I specifically asked Mayor Chris to address? The cops, the Gestapoization of the police, some other things as far as not people in the community in Charleston County not being able to get to Folly. Is 2.6 miles from Folly Beach to Harris Teeter. That's where the bus goes. So when are those things gonna be addressed? When can we talk about this?
This is the short-term rental. We can,
I
and
know,
I'll
I
talk to
realize
you
that,
about
I realize that, but
that.
when is that gonna be addressed? Because nothing's been addressed. A woman keyed my car and she's not been arrested.
Okay, well, we'll have to take that offline, and we talked to you last week about it, and I think the detective came out to your place to talk to you.
They have done nothing.
We could,
They've done
all
nothing.
right, well, let's move forward, please.
So, STR regulations from 2010 to 2026, that's what we're gonna spend the next few minutes about. We're gonna reference ordinance numbers as we go through here. It's a thick packet of ordinance language. We're gonna post all this online. If anyone wants a copy of the ordinances, we can get you one, but they are all available online. I'm gonna be referring to these, but we're not necessarily gonna be reading from these. But Wes did just bring in some copies. If you wanna see the old ordinances, we just made some copies. But what I wanted to do for council and for the public is just to kind of put in one place the evolution of how we went from basically the only rule for a short-term license was you had to have a business license to where we are to now, where we have to have a business license, a very in-depth rental registration, and a cap on licenses. It's the evolution of how the program kind of grew over time. So prior to 2010, I have personal knowledge of this because I was there. You just had to have a business license. Every year, you had to renew your business license. You could renew one license, multiple properties on one license. And it was a problem because we had, at that time, 4 or 5 companies that managed most of the rentals. The license renewals went to the companies, and when renewal season came along, we would get back. We don't manage that anymore. That one got sold. And basically, as the staff person in charge of tracking down license renewals, it was a nightmare. It was before the internet. We didn't know who owned what, who managed what, who had switched during the year. So we proposed and passed a basic requirement for a rental registration. And this was kind of the first additional layer for STRs on Folly Beach. Instead of having a license, you now had to do a rental registration. And it was a pretty basic form. Council has it in front of them. It's a 3-page ordinance, much shorter than what we have today. And it said, we just need to know who owns this property, how to get in touch with them, who manages it, how to get in touch with them, and who do we call in an emergency. And that was it. The purpose, the need, the community issue at that time was really an administrative one. This wasn't about nuisance rentals or the number of rentals. This was purely about identifying rentals and tracking property information. So we started with this 3-page ordinance. I've got a note here, it's for later, but I think now's a good time to say it. You'll see that today's ordinance is significantly longer than 3 pages. It's way more complicated than what was passed in 2010. But each step of the way, each one of these things I'm going to talk about today evolved through careful consideration of a city council based on public feedback at the time. None of this was done in a vacuum. All of this was meant to address the evolving needs to manage rentals, and I think what we're doing today is just a continuation of that process. So again, thank you for being here. So 2010, rental registrations. First step in our regulatory scheme. Fast forward 2017, so nothing for 7 years. In that 7 years, the number of rentals was increasing, the number of licenses were increasing, and we started to get a lot of feedback about event houses or nuisance rentals. These were super short-term rentals used for parties and events. Noise complaints, parking complaints, some of the things you hear today, those were kind of growing in the background. And so in 2017, I think it actually passed in 2018, because this was late in the year, the city set up a short-term rental committee to study nuisance rentals and how to regulate rentals. And they ended up by expanding the program and created the rental strike system. So there was a citizens committee. Their specific stated intent was to address the growth in the number of rental licenses and address nuisance rentals. One important thing they did and added to the ordinance is they added a purpose section in the rental ordinance. So if you look at the rental ordinance today, in the stated purposes, in the very beginning of the ordinance, it says the purpose of our STR regulations is to protect residential districts, the integrity of neighborhoods, and to track rentals. So that's an important concept as we go forth considering changes to the ordinance, that from 2017, the first time someone put in a purpose, that purpose referenced protecting residential districts, the integrity of neighborhoods, and the tracking of rentals. And you can see that today if you go to our codes and look at chapter 117. The rental registration program was expanded. We started to go into getting information about the property itself, the number of bedrooms, how many people could be in it, how many parking spaces, was it on septic or sewer. So we started kind of build out our data about rentals, not just who owned them or who managed them, but actually what's the inventory, how many bedrooms are for rent, does everyone have the right parking spaces, et cetera. And then we came up with our first formalized codified rules for special events at rental properties. There was a size limit of 49 people, a limit on amplified music. Then that was just purely to manage events. We had, I won't name address, but we had one house that was used for wedding receptions, and that kind of precipitated this whole system. And then we got the strike system. The first strike system was based on warnings or tickets. So if someone called the police on your rental and you got a warning, you got a strike. It was heavy loaded towards allegation versus confirmation. We also included notice for the noise, and this was the first time noise was addressed in the rental regulations, saying you must post notice of the noise ordinance. You'll see that grew over time to many other ordinances, but in 2017 was the first acknowledgement officially in the code that giving notice of the noise ordinance and noise ordinance limits at short-term rentals were kind of a problem. So the short version is that the 2017 ordinance was a nuisance-based ordinance. It did touch on the number of rentals. We see here the neighborhood preservation zoning district was rejected. There was a concern at that time that rentals were starting to show up in areas that had not been traditionally rentals, Sunset Point. This is when they first started to kind of move to the back of the island. And that committee did propose a neighborhood zoning overlay, which would allow people to ask city council to eliminate rentals in their neighborhood. That was eventually rejected because that ability still exists today. If anyone would like to ban rentals in a certain area of Folly Beach, they're more than welcome to come and ask council to amend the zoning. But that was the first time the kind of concept of limiting where rentals could be popped up. So that's 2017. We moved from identifying property owners and tracking rentals to addressing nuisance rentals and sort of starting to address the numbers of rentals. In 2018, we got the STR helper, which evolved through several versions, host compliance, and now is Granicus. It's been purchased several times, but this is our first rental tracking software. We knew there were rentals that were unlicensed. We did not know how to capture them. So in 2018, this was state-of-the-art breaking. We were actually one of the pilot communities for one of the earliest STR tracking software implementations in the country. And this is a computer program that basically sweeps the internet every night, looks at Airbnb, VRBO, all the listings, uses computer algorithms to identify where they are and send us a note. We don't have a license for this property. So this was our first real technological advance that allowed us to really drill down and find the rentals. And that began in 2018. At that time, we also required individual licenses for all units. And we will follow up on that in a few years. But in 2018 is where we started saying, okay, you can no longer renew one license for all your properties. You have to get individual licenses. And so in 2018, the focus now became, how many rentals do we really have? We knew rentals were growing. We knew they had been growing over time, but no one could tell you how many there really were because we weren't sure we had them all licensed. So basically, any rental numbers you see before 2018, we like to kind of put an asterisk behind them because we don't know how accurate that was. And even in the first few years of implementation, after we got the software, it grew, but not necessarily because there were 200 rentals overnight that weren't here before. It's because we found them. So I'd say for STR growth purposes, 2020, 2019 is the real, when we were able to kind of track real growth versus we found these previously unknown, well not unknown, unlicensed rentals. So 2019, I guess it's 2019. Again, we're still trying to drill down and really track STR growth. How much are the real numbers changing? So we split our license classification. Prior to 2019, all rental licenses were renewed under the same business license code. So we had no easy way to separate long-term licenses from short-term licenses. So this helps us, again, refine. So 2010, who owns it? Who manages it? 2017, let's address some of the behavior and the numbers. 2018, 2019, let's do everything we can to make sure we have accurate information about how many rentals we have and where they are and what type of rentals they are.
So actually, Mr. Pope, then, did we actually answer one of the previous questions as far as when to begin the real accurate, quantifiable, reasonable, fair data?
I don't know if we answered the question, but it's definitely,
Well,
that's definitely part of the discussion of when to go back to. So, but yes, I'd say after 2018, the numbers are much more accurate in terms of reflection of what was really out here.
that's great.
That's a good point.
So, all right, Wes, next. So that gets us to 2021. In 2021, this is an ordinance to formalize our policy from 2018. In 2018, we made a decision, a policy decision to require individual licenses. One of our license holders sued us over that and won. And so we passed an ordinance to formally adopt that requirement, that we have individual licenses for individual units. And that was kind of the end of, well, I'm gonna call it the pre-cap era. That's kind of in, everything for the rest of the slides leads up to, influences, or is somehow related to where we are today. In 2021 was the first time there was a proposed moratorium on rental licenses. And this is, I tried hard to keep this presentation from any sort of debate about the cap or merits of the cap, but I did want to highlight the numbers here, go back to what I talked about, the number of rentals. In 2015, there were 329 documented rentals, and this is all short-term rentals, not ISTR, OSTR, this is all short-term rentals. So in 2015, we had 329 licensed short-term rentals. In 2021, when this moratorium was proposed, there were 990. But going back to what I said about the tracking, in 2018, at the end of the first year with STR Helper, we identified 663 rentals, and those had jumped to 990 in 2021. So that 329 to 990, that's kind of an if, because prior to 2018, we don't know how accurate that was. At the end of 2018, it probably still wasn't 100% accurate, but it's accurate enough that 663 to 990 gives you an idea of how rapidly the number of rental licenses being issued were growing up to 2021. So I know in 2026, it's hard to put ourselves in the mind frame of 2021, but in 2021, we're looking at 300 more rentals over 3 years, basically. And so that's when the first moratorium was proposed and failed.
Do we have any idea how many were because of duplexes and threeplexes and required? Any ballpark, or is it like 30, or is it like 100, or?
The STR committee has that data, and I can get it to you guys. There were some, but it wasn't significant enough to throw off the whole thing.
Is it safe to say that the numbers, let's call it 30% increase, okay? The 30% increase is a result of identifying the illegal Airbnbs?
I would say 329 to 663 from 2015 to 2018.
Yeah.
A large part of that would be attributed to the software.
And just for the
The
record.
663 is much closer to a
I get
reality.
it, yeah. So, but just for the record, this was endemic or is endemic across the entire nation. This is not just Folly Beach, okay? This is the whole nation. People getting away with not licensing their Airbnbs per se, so, the due diligence was done in order for them to come into, compliance with the city's ordinances. So with the city's policies.
And that had no differentiator between OSTR and ISTR.
Right, correct.
Right.
It's total,
Just complete, whether it was rental or not.
total STRs, yep. So that 2015 to 2021, the jump happened in 2018. So, and that 663 is at the end of 2018 license year, which is actually 2019. So the 663 is much closer to an absolute number, a real number of what was existing in 2019.
Got it.
So, Mr. Pope, my question would be, when we went from clustering the licenses and you went to individual, how much did the individual counting impact that?
I can't tell you exactly, but that started in 2018. So the 2018 numbers are done at the end of the 2018 business license year and would capture all of that. So that number for 663 means that's the end of the 2018 business license year in 2019. That's after we started requiring licenses by policy for individual units and after we had the software implemented. So that 663 reflects all of those things.
Okay, good.
So the 663 to 990 is the, well, I think it's fairly confident to say the real growth. Those aren't, 663 to 990 isn't finding new duplexes or triplexes. It isn't, that was all done to get to 663. That's
Thank you.
how 329 got to 663.
That answers my.
Yep, got it.
And that's the only statistic or anything I put in here, because today's meeting is not about, numerics. But, so I just wanted to put everyone in the frame of mind that was happening in 2021. Moratorium failed. So at that time, and that ordinance 1721 was later in the year, so 2021, 2022 is basically in short order. The STR committee got formed, and the STR committee met 10 times over about a year, and they presented a series of recommendations to the mayor. The mayor took those recommendations, made his own recommendations, and presented those to council. We're not reviewing those today because almost every item in that list is here at the end of this presentation.
Okay. Question, how were what function was used by city staff to determine those that were not in compliance with a license? There wasn't a department, there wasn't, the police weren't
There's always
working.
been a business licensing
Okay,
department.
but it wasn't the department we have now.
Correct.
Okay, it wasn't staffed the way we have it now, right? So tell me a little bit about the ecosystem of that. How they identified those individuals? Was it because neighbor called somebody in, or was it because there was, active surveillance being done, or there's some kind of mechanism?
Well,
Tell
after
me a little bit.
2018, we relied on the software that flagged rental advertisements and said this property
Got it.
is being advertised for rent. It
Okay.
does not have a license.
Got
That
it.
became our primary tool, but neighbor reporting is and continues to be
Okay.
a tool.
Okay.
Um, But advertising is the number one.
Okay, got it.
And up till that point, before creating the department, it was through the system of business license, it was
Yeah.
through the traditional, let's say, system.
So when the committee was selected, how was it selected, and where did they come from, and what were their qualifications? Tell me a little bit about that.
We had one rental manager, the planner, a citizen. I don't.
Council
It looks
member.
like three staff,
Council-
three staff members and three, local island residents, and one council
And
member.
council.
Including a
Including
short-term
Adam
rental
Barker.
property manager and a short-term rental owner.
Okay, so
So-
three and three.
Yep, so that committee was formed, they met 10 times.
How was the
The
committee?
mayor appointed them.
So were their qualifications vetted? Do we know that they were independently analyzed? How was it determined? The mayor made a decision based
The
on?
mayor appointed them. For example, I don't know if he took our property management representative who's in the room and vetted his property management rental history, but I do know that he
Can we
was
name
appointed.
people?
Yeah, Alex was on the committee.
Alex?
So I don't think Alex was interviewed or subject to a background check, other than he was a property manager and he was asked
Alex,
to be on the
and
committee.
you're with whom?
Carolina One Vacation Rentals.
Okay, so you were on the committee.
Correct.
So you're speaking evidence to, so tell me about the qualifications, how they determine, I'm not saying you're not qualified, I'm just curious how it was decided.
I don't know how to pick the other members. I just have a history on the island. I've worked out here for 15 years, so I don't know exactly what they didn't ask me for my resume or anything.
But
I get
did
where
you
you're-
did you submit a resume? How did it work? I don't understand. how
They
it
were
worked.
done by mayoral appointment.
Yeah, and let's.
Okay.
leave it at that.
Not our mayor,
Yeah.
the previous mayor.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Got it. We don't need to tease.
Got it.
So they met, they made a series of recommendations, the mayor got their recommendations, he made his series of recommendations, those were proposed in an ordinance to city council, that ordinance failed. And the mayor's proposed ordinance was the first time was the first time the idea of a cap was introduced.
Okay.
And this is, ordinance 2622, and the mayor proposed a cap of 806% rentals with no limit on 4% rentals, and those were based on the 2021 numbers. So in 2021, We had 990 total rentals.
So the data that the mayor chose, okay, the data that the mayor used in order to make that decision came from the committee.
No, the data came from the number of short-term rentals. Well, the
No,
number
there
from the
had to be
cap
some
number.
data from the committee,
From the
right?
cap number. Mr. Holliday, you can address me.
Okay,
So
I
that
think.
when you say the data-
If I've got an active participant in the room, I
I
certainly.
was also an
there-
active participant, and so
Okay.
if you would just let me.
Mhm.
When you say the data to propose, do you mean the data for the number or the data for the other regulations?
The data that came in the report dated January 26th of 2022.
So
Where
the
did it come from?
committee got the data from city staff who had been tracking the number of rentals. The committee members were not privy to the number of rentals. So like, I'm just trying to nail down what you're asking.
What I'm trying to find is where the data came from that made the recommendations, and it looks like there's, I don't know, 13 or 14 over there.
So all this is online for the public too. It's on their full report. They used rental license data, they used real estate data, they used nationwide studies on the effect of rental caps. They used tax data, property tax data, tax data. So they used a lot of information that's kind of there in the packet. And we can certainly bring that to you guys when have the meeting for that. But in the short, there's a page on our website, the STR timeline. It has links to everything I've talked about. In particular interest is the STR committee recommendations. There's a link there, and it's got every study, every number, every chart, every table they used to come up with their recommendations. So
Okay.
they made the recommendations. The cap, the first time a cap was ever presented, 2022, and that failed.
Understand.
And then we moved to ordinance 2722. The cap failed, but the short-term rental committee also made a number of recommendations related to what I call nuisance issues or operational issues. And those became ordinance 27-22, which did pass. And this was basically an expansion of the rental registration process, some changes to operating requirements for short-term rentals, and a big thing is they revised the strikes. The first strike system was based on warnings, and a lot of the feedback we got was like, that's presuming guilt. If you get a warning for noise, or even if you get a ticket for noise, until that ticket's been disposed of, we don't know that there really was noise. So they revised the strike system to say it's based on convictions. So today, if you have a property, a short-term rental property, and someone calls the police, and the police come out and they issue a ticket, you don't get a strike because you got a ticket. You get a strike once the judge says, yes, that ticket is valid, there was an offense. So that's kind of the big thing with 2722, is it changed the strike system to be based on convictions. But we also beefed up the rental registrations to make the owners certify. They've seen the beach rules, they're giving out the beach rules, to make the owners certify, they know where their septic tank is, the renters know where the septic tank is, to make the owners certify they have smoke alarms and fire detectors. It's just a lot of beefing up the requirements for owner notice, rental notice, and property information. So I'm gonna put 2722 generally into the nuisance and operational bucket in terms of STR regulations. Next. Then we get to 2023. In 2023, we have the STR referendum and the cap. Important note, the STR referendum and cap were not initiated by the city. The city did not write the language. The city did not propose the language. It was not a copy of the mayor's failed ordinance. This was a new ordinance introduced by a citizen that went to city council. City council declined to pass it, so it went to a public vote, and it was adopted by the voters. And then the big component of the referendum language was that it split rental licenses into 6% and 4%, or primary and non-primary residents, and set a cap on the non-primary residents.
And who was the chief architect?
Mr. John McFarlane.
Am I allowed to ask him questions?
Generally in work sessions, it's not a back and forth with.
Yeah, I understand, but are you prepared to answer all the questions about McFarland's architectural plan?
What questions do you have?
So, for instance, when the architectural plan was provided to the city, was there any kind of conversation with the city officials,
What
mayor or
architectural,
otherwise?
architectural plan?
The actual ordinance was, the referendum was presented and voted upon. When it was written, was the referendum written in tandem with?
No, sir.
No information from the city, no person on the city council and no person, no mayor and no.
I can't speak for what the mayor may or may not have done, or a city council, I'm not privy to council member or the mayor's private discussions. Mr. McFarland may have requested data from the city, but there was no assistance from the city drafting the ordinance or
Okay.
writing the ordinance.
But I'm not allowed to ask him a question, I have to ask you, so since I can't ask him, am I to make the assumption that it was done in a vacuum or was done independently by himself? I don't understand. If there's some information that can be shared, why can't Mr. McFarland share it with us?
Let me ask you this, I
Let me-
mean,
I don't
my
understand.
intention for this whole thing, and I get where you're going, but, and it's important to know the past, but what we need, my focus for this whole process is to evaluate where we are, what problems currently exist based on the feedback we get,
Okay?
and then make decisions going forward that can make this
And I can
ordinance
tell
better.
you, and I'll answer your question.
100% agree with the mayor. It's just that if we're gonna do a walk down the history road here, I just need the historical perspective,
Well, I'll
that's
get,
all.
and I'll restate it again for you. The STR referendum language was not written, produced, advised from the city. It came from a private party. It was introduced to the city by public vote.
With no input from the city.
When you say no input, did he maybe write, how many licenses were in 2015? Yes. But in terms of guiding, proposing, suggesting, no. It was not
Okay,
the city's
well,
idea.
that's fine. We're not gonna dance around this since we're not allowed to ask the question directly to the individual architect, which is fine, but
The only thing that I could offer up, having lived this, myself, it's the only thing I can offer up, and I'm a council person, is that regardless, to me, because I sat here during some of the votes, and then eventually the referendum was crafted, I can say I was not hands-on on it, but I can say that the numbers that the city had were accessed to determine the number.
And that's what I'm trying to drill down to, Mr. Holliday, your question. Are you asking if he used data to do his referendum, or are you asking if
just wanna know if there
someone
were-
at the city wrote the referendum?
I'm gonna be as
for him?
clear as I
Okay,
can.
I'm gonna be clear. What I'm hearing is, just here, someone at the city did not write it,
Correct.
data was accessed from the city. Is that correct?
I assume so.
Yeah, public data, I mean, you saw it in the meetings, you saw it, where, you saw that. So I'm only stepping in because I lived it, and I'm just trying to bring clarity about what I'm hearing today, that's all I'm doing. So that, to me, that's where I stop right now. Now, later on, I might have more questions, but for your overview, if that was helpful, that's how I lived it.
And I'm
That's how-
gonna restate,
that's-
the mayor's absolutely right, we're just pushing forward, right? And Mr. Fink is right, we're just pushing forward and where we're gonna go from here forward. If we're gonna walk down history road, I just need the history. That's all I'm looking for. I'm not asking for anything that's unorthodox. If there was some kind of collusion, I'm not saying there was, but if there was some kind of collusion, or there was a dialogue, or somebody has information they can share as to how it was crafted, and if there was any kind of input other than the data, as Dr. Houghton said, then it'd be nice to know, because quite honestly,
Well,
I don't know, I mean,
Yeah, so
actually on Monday, remember the conversation about Facebook? And how Facebook is being used to propagate all kinds of, let's just call it junk, in terms of data. And everybody's being colluded here and there. You're hearing this story, you're hearing this story. It's not really true. The Tides isn't really doing this, right? All that dialogue that's out there. I mean, let's just straight up be honest here. What my concern is that everybody's coming to us saying there was some kind of an active solicitation on the inside.
Well,
And-
does that further the conversation we're trying to have today, though? I don't know, I think Mr. Pope has given you fairly clear answers on it.
And I will, do
Yeah.
you mind if I just
Sure.
restate it? I'm not privy to the private communications of the city council or the mayor. I cannot speak for what any city council person or the mayor did or did not say. I can tell you that city staff did not write, produce, endorse, or in any way promote the language of the referendum.
Yes, I heard that.
That's about as clear as you can make it.
And I spent several years of my life actively having no opinion on it.
I heard that.
Because we did not like
It's-
it.
I heard that.
So the referendum passes. It is a bare bones referendum. It set out some principles, but it did lack fine-grained details on how to implement it. So shortly after it passed in 2023, we had our first set of technical amendments. And basically, all the STR regulations since then have been either technical amendments to answer an implementation question or a substantive amendment addressing concerned areas that were either STR committee recommendations that didn't make it, mayoral recommendations that didn't make it, things that came up after the referendum passed that no one anticipated, and we've got that list at the end to go through. So the referendum passed, and for the last 3 years, we've been fine-tuning it and one by one kind of addressing the major areas of concern that have been brought to city council. Some have been considered and rejected, some have been adopted, some have been partially adopted. So first technical amendments, the term primary residence isn't really a legal term, so we changed it to legal residence, which is tied to your property tax rate. We started working on the wait list to make the wait list available, and we defined dwelling. These were technical things. They didn't change the function of the cap as it was passed. We also then, because of the new ordinance, we got a bunch of appeals the first year as we implemented it. It was new to us, it was new to the community. And so we ended up going back and amending our license appeals process to make it much more favorable for folks who wanted to appeal. We beefed up the notice requirement, we gave more timing. This was a new thing. Each one of these cases was more complicated than the last, and so we changed our appeals to accommodate that. Ordinance 0124, this was the first kind of substantive amendment to the cap as passed. We created a one-time inheritance license. When the cap passed, there was no mechanism for someone who inherited a property to obtain a new license outside of the wait list. So council did adopt a policy that one time, the first inheritor could get an ISTR license for any existing property. So that was the first thing. Inheritance licenses are one of the concerns, and this is how council addressed it in 124. We created medical hardship licenses. There was no mechanism for folks who maybe had a 4% property and they had to go to a nursing home or they had to get care and their property tax changed. They lost their licenses, they couldn't get a new one. Council created the medical hardship license to address those situations. The minimum night rental, in the mayoral proposal and in the STR committee proposal, there was suggestions that there had to be some amount of activity in order to maintain the license, to keep people from, quote, squatting on ISTR licenses, just hoarding them. And so council adopted a minimum rental night requirement. Now every ISTR is required to rent 28 nights a year or they lose it. When the referendum passed, there was no mechanism to allow rentals under the Vacation Rental Act. In South Carolina, if you sell a rental, the new owner is legally obligated to honor rentals on the books for 90 days post-sale. As written, the referendum did not allow us to issue that new owner a license, so we now issue provisional licenses so folks can rent and cover any 90 days after they buy a house that was previously licensed. We also refined the deadlines for renewals of rental registrations and licenses. That first year that it kicked in, the deadline was the deadline. That was a change because traditionally with business licenses, you can renew later and later and later as long as you pay a higher penalty. So with this new scheme of if you don't renew, you lose your license, we can no longer allow open-ended renewals. And so we set a deadline for license renewals and registration renewals as 10 business days after the actual deadline. So everyone gets about a 2-week grace period. Allow new licenses for like placement units. We had some folks come up and say, hey, I've got a licensed property. I want to put back the same house, but my house has termites. We've got one right at the corner of 2nd and Cooper. Can I get a license? The referendum wouldn't have allowed that, so now council does let like-for-like replacement units be re-licensed. And then we defined property transfer. The original language just said that these things terminate upon property transfer. Property transfer is very nuanced. If I put the property into my LLC, is that a property transfer under the ordinance? If my LLC is sold into Dr. Houghton, is that a property transfer? So we had to address that, and we adopted the state's definition of assessable transfer of interest. So now there are a range of property transfers that are allowed and don't trigger loss of license. So 2024 is when council first started to go back and kind of look at the ordinance, address some of the concerns that were being raised. Next page, please. And then 2025, we continue gathering feedback, gathering new and novel questions throughout 2025 to see how this ordinance is functioning versus how it's written. So we ended up waiving the 20-night minimum for houses that had major projects. So we had folks, you're telling me I have to rent 28 nights. I can't rent 28 nights because I've gutted my house and I'm bringing it up to code. I shouldn't lose my license for that, so council changed that. Then we fixed the date of your tax classification to the date of application for a license. When the ordinance first passed, we had folks paying to retroactively change their property tax class so that they can claim it as a 6% property. And then a few years later, we had folks who were in danger of losing their license because they had changed their property tax classification, going back and undoing that change to get around the loss of license. So now the tax class is fixed at the date you apply. The military exemption, we limit OSTR rentals to 72 days, but if you're active duty military on deployment, you can rent more than 72 days without losing your 4% tax rate. And so we wanted, that was new to us. We needed to amend our ordinance to not conflict with that. And then we required emergency contact. So these are a mix of technical and substantive ordinances. Next.
Explain military level.
So I'll defer to Charleston County for the formal definition because they do run the property taxing. But generally speaking, you can rent more than 72 days and not lose your legal resident status if you are in the military and you meet the exemption and you document it. So if you have a 4% home that's your legal residence and you deploy to Germany for 3 years, you can keep your 4% residence and you can rent your house while you're gone and not lose that. Our ordinance didn't allow that, but the law did, so we needed to fix that. So those were our 2025 amendments. So next up, Wes. So before we go into this, just in general, evolution. It began with tracking rentals, identifying who managed those rentals. It kind of evolved into managing nuisances related to rentals, livability issues, and building out our property's information so we knew what is being rented. And then the final stage was addressing the growth in the number of rentals. And once that happened, we've now been just beefing up, filling in the gaps in how we implement the code. It was a bare bones code, and so we've been doing it. So I'm gonna go through a list of things. Some of these are hyper-specific, some of them are kind of broad. They include things that were brought up in the STR committee recommendations. They include things that were brought up in the mayoral recommendations. This is kind of a summary of all the feedback we got since this cap passed. These are all the topic areas that people have emailed, called, testified about. They're in green because they've been addressed. I'm not saying they've been addressed in the way that satisfies everyone. I'm saying council has acted on them. And then later we have some orange and reds. So first up, already discussed it, the Vacation Rental Act. We now allow those folks to rent. We had, in the beginning, we had folks advertising a 7-bedroom house, but they'd only put 4 on their rental registration and their septic tank only said 2. So we've been working through making sure septic capacity matches what's registered to rent, and that when you actually advertise your rental, you're not renting any more than you are licensed to rent. Partial 6% rated structures. Not everything is a clean 4% or 6%. Some folks have portions of their homes that are taxed at 4% that can be rented out for more than 72 days. And so the final solution was that if you had a partial rating prior to the cap, you can continue to use your OSTR for unlimited number of days for that portion of your house. If you have a partial rating after the cap, you're subject to the 72-day rental. Basically, before the cap, this partial 6% carries. After the cap, the partial 4% carries. The grace period I just discussed, is no longer a hard deadline. There's a 2-week grace period, just to allow folks, because this is a serious penalty if you don't renew on time, it allows folks more time to get that in. Demolition of structure, I talked about. Property transfers, I talked about. Minimum rental activity, I talked about. Placement units, I got into. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. The allowable scope of renovations, it's been a big concern. People come in and say, what can I do to my property and not lose my license? The ordinance requires you to have a CO to maintain your license. And so what council settled on is that as long as the renovations you do don't make that home uninhabitable and you're able to continue your CO throughout, you don't lose your license. But if you go in and gut the house completely, you take out the kitchen, the bathrooms, the septic tank, and it's no longer inhabitable, we consider that CO to be invalid, and so you lose the license. Unless you rebuild it exactly the same size and number of bedrooms as it was before. Retroactive property tax and military exemptions, and then creating a wait list. This was a bigger deal 2 years ago, but council had to go through. The ordinance said council will create a wait list. Didn't give any guidance, so what council decided is we now have a 2-tier wait list. Phase 1 has about 154 people on it. It's ordered in the date they acquired the property. And when and if we get below 800 licenses, if the cap makes it that long in that form, we'll start awarding licenses off the wait list in the order you acquired your property. So the folks who have owned their property the longest are first on the list for license as they become available. We've got about 154 people on that list. We have a second list that opened later, that's first come, first served. I think we're up to 70 or so on that list. And if and when we get through all 154 owners on the first list, we'll start offering them to the second. But, you know, that was a 6-month process for council to define that wait list, but I consider that one to be kind of a closed item. Next, Wes. Now we get into some of the more, what I'm calling unsettled issues. One of the recommendations early on that did not make it through to the cap is allowing inheritance licenses. The mayor's ordinance, which was based on the short-term rental committee recommendations, would have allowed anyone who allowed transfers to eligible family members. The current ordinance does not, only one time. So anyone who has a license now today, the first generation of heirs, they're entitled to a license. They can get a license. That provision does not apply to the license they get. So right now, there's basically a one-time provision for inheritance of STR licenses. That does not apply to a non-licensed STR property. So, so that's, I'm calling it unsettled, but instead of a blanket allowance for all heirs, we have a one-time exception.
Does OSTR go to OSTR and ISTR goes to ISTR? Or they all can be ISTR?
So an ISTR, someone who inherits an ISTR can obtain an ISTR. Of course, if they move into it, they could get an OSTR, but.
That's
yes.
more about your tax rate.
But yes, anyone who has an ISTR can pass it down once as of today. So another proposal that was in earlier versions of recommendations or ordinances was to allow existing 4% owners to convert to ISTR licenses in the future. Past versions and recommendations said that anyone who had a 4% license, if and when their property changed to 6%, they could get a license. That didn't make it through the cap, but it has been amended by council to allow that to happen by medical hardship. So today, if you're a 4% owner, the only way you can switch to an ISTR is through medical hardship. Next up, allowing purchasers to get ISTRs. This was also a recommendation in prior versions and studies to allow anyone who bought a property to get an ISTR. That, of course, is dropped off with the cap. If you buy a property, you get on the wait list. Allowing, yeah, that was just for licenses, so there's kind of two separate ones. The first was a recommendation that anyone who had an ISTR, anyone who bought it could get an ISTR, and the next person who bought it could get an ISTR, which would basically have kind of created permanent licenses. That was a proposal. It has not survived. There was a separate proposal to allow anyone to buy any property and get an ISTR. So anyone who owned property at the time, this wasn't the cap, this was a prior version, but anyone who owned property at that time, the next person who bought it could get an ISTR. That recommendation has not survived into any ordinance today. Exempting multi-unit buildings from the cap, that was discussed heavily in future, or prior versions. The STR committee recommended that multi-unit buildings be exempt from the cap. They did discuss how that would affect the cap in the residential areas. It wasn't just a blanket, allow multi-unit buildings to get it, and then lower the cap elsewhere, but that proposal has not survived in the current version. Exempting commercially zoned properties, slight difference there. All the multi-unit buildings are in the commercial zoning, but all the buildings in the commercial zone are not multi-unit buildings. So separately, there was a proposal to allow anyone in the commercial area to get a license. Commercial area is walkable to downtown, it's where the sewer system is. There are a variety of reasons why that was proposed in the past. It has not survived. Exempting HOA properties from the cap. Most of our multi-unit buildings are governed by HOAs, and there was a proposal in the past to allow individual properties governed by a homeowners association to let the homeowners association make the decision, not the city. Because now we're in a situation where the city prohibits rentals in an area where the HOA may have wanted to allow them. That has not survived the cap. Allowing a universal 72-day license. So after the cap passed, or even before the cap, as kind of a counter proposal, there were discussions of no such thing, ISTR, OSTR. Anyone can just have a 72-day license. Everyone on the beach is entitled to a 72-day license. That proposal has not survived or made it into law. These two at the bottom, these were both part of prior recommendations from the committee. I got them as no longer applicable just because of where we are, but I just thought it was worthwhile. The committee recommended that when the moratorium expired, going back to the business license deadline. In past years, you had basically unlimited free pass to renew your license late. A lot of people did that. There were a lot of people who didn't renew their license until it was time to renew the next year. And that's just the way it was forever. So when this ordinance passed and that deadline became hard, this was in 2023, we had people who didn't have a 2022 license. They were 6-7 months late with their renewal because they had been 6-7 months late with their renewal forever, and suddenly they were penalized for that. So the committee actually, sorry, not the committee, this was a amendment later, say we should allow those folks this first year to come in super late, get last year's license, and then renew it. That did not survive. And now we're so far beyond it that I don't think we could even contemplate it. And the same for the allowing licenses for properties under construction. There were a dozen or so houses under construction when the moratorium and later the cap passed. The committee had recommended that those properties be allowed to be licensed. That did not make it. So those properties were denied licenses, and again, 3 years later, we're kind of away from that. But, so that's kind of the things that have been proposed that have not survived to the current version. And I think that last section of the list really mirrors a lot of what we're still hearing. Commercial properties, licenses for people who purchase or inherit. I think those are kind of the main ones, or maybe the 72-day license. So if it's been the subject of citizen feedback or a prior proposal, I think this list captures all of it. These are all the changes that have been proposed. Some have passed and some haven't. So the next step in this process will be for council to look at these things. This is what was proposed before. Let's reconsider it, or let's not reconsider it. And I would love to hear if there's anything that's not on this list in terms of the function of the ordinance or proposed changes.
I think the study, this is a good list to begin with. And I think if we look at all of these and ask the independent researcher to come back and say, all right, we do this, these are the impacts to the community, to the local economy, what have you. Again, if you have individual situations that you want to address, email those to us. I mean, we want to make sure this list reflects your concerns if we can, and then we can move forward.
And council, do you guys have any kind of bucket of concerns that's not on this list?
I mean, yes, but I mean, I think we've reached the punctuation for today. There will be a myriad of questions that will be percolated through citizen comments, emails, text messages, meetings, whatever is necessary for people to get their point across so that we can, chew on it and decide where to go with it as a council. But for now, I don't think we need to open up Pandora's box.
All right, Wes, you wanna go next? So the next step is to take that list, to take additional public comment, to take additional review from council, and nail down what topic areas are we gonna look at amendments. We need to identify what things we want to change, feel like need to be changed. So that's what we need to do at our next meeting. The date's TBD. I don't know if you guys wanna try to set a date right now today, but, the general plan for that is to advertise it and say council is gonna consider what amendments should be made, could be made to the short-term rental ordinance. Please tell us what you think that is. The list that I just presented is based on, the last 3 years of emails. There may be something out there that someone has that's new, or totally welcome to repeat prior concerns to make sure we capture them all. But we wanna take all the feedback, I hate to say it this way, what's wrong with the current ordinance, so the council can decide what specific things they want to study and fix.
So if we just give you a couple dates, I know people's got traveling, that type of thing. I wanna make sure we get as much input as we can from council. Then we can set up, next.
Will we be able to set something on the website where people can just click on the button to provide input? Like
We
a
can-
one-stop?
Yeah.
We have comments at follybeach.gov, which is our email, and a button on the website will do that. We're transitioning our website, so we're trying not to add new things from it.
Okay.
But
When's the new one come on?
It's July.
but we do have comments at follybeach.gov, which is open always.
But I'd like to maybe put like a Facebook post about this and say, if you have comments about the ongoing study, please submit them to, and then we can provide the email address. That work?
Who sorts those?
We will advertise it and solicit public.
Who gets the comments on the current website?
It comes, it's like a distribution list. It goes, and then we forward it to you guys.
I have a question for the mayor.
Sure.
Do you have a sense of, feeling of the timing of this? Do you wanna try to get this done in the next week, next month, next 6 years? What are we talking about here?
I'm thinking was, I don't wanna drag this out, but
Okay.
I wanna be realistic with, like I said, we do have some travel restrictions on, some people are gonna be out, but I do wanna have as many council people here as
Do you
well.
wanna try to get this done before the beginning of the next fiscal year?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right. And, maybe to recap, since the last work sessions, except for Mr. McFarland, there weren't really a lot of citizens here. The budgetary impact of this, of your study, isn't related to a current fixed number that's in the hardwired budget that we're currently looking at. We're still determining that budget, right, Mr. Poe? We haven't made a decision on that.
Correct.
We're not putting specific numbers because we don't know what that cost will be, contingent upon what the RFP, how it's designed, and who responds to it, et cetera, and when it's executed, so to speak, so.
So just for clarity, we do have funds at the budget, in the budget, and we're in the middle of discussion. So there is a study in the budget. My only question when you ask, as far as the timeline, is it's not just, sort of us who can make those meetings. It's, are we saying that at the end of the next fiscal year, just to begin there, because that we will have had some of the homework done.
So the hard deadline needs to be no later than November of 2026. Because if we do a radical change to the system of regulating STRs,
Yep.
we have to have time to adapt our computer programs, our mailings, our notices, and
All,
the public
the
has.
study completed by November.
Yeah,
Correct.
We need the study completed, we need the ordinance amended, we need the new rules to be in place. So that's,
So that's the, I'm, sorry.
A lot.
I really want this done so that we can go into the next rentals registration season clean and ready to go.
Agreed.
March, yes.
I applaud that.
So when would the
So-
study have to be done to make that date?
He just said
September
that,
at the latest.
What?
So does that make sense in the sense of the money's in the budget? In order for the city to function if something changes, November 2026 is when decisions would need to be made. Turn that whole process over and get to the business license function.
Correct. In December, we start messaging people. It's time to renew. Don't forget, these are the rules for ISTRs, these are the rules for OSTRs. And so we have to have everything in place prior to the beginning of notice for the business license year. And depending on what changes, it could be really easy. Hypothetical, if we lifted the cap and went back to the way it was, that'd be really easy to adapt our processes.
But you're
it-
saying you need the ordinance done prior to the November budget, so that you can do the budget with the
No,
impact?
no,
It's not a
sir.
budget,
It's just for the ordinance changes.
It's just for
the
implementation.
function.
So going to your point, Blair, if we have the timeline's really dictated by the ordinance changes, correct? I mean, you
Yeah.
follow.
I just wanted everyone to be clear.
I'm just not sure, are we entertaining conversations with the citizens? I mean,
No.
it looks like it's not bi-directional, but it is bi-directional, which is it? I
Well-
mean, look, okay, here's the one thing I would request. If we, depending on the mayor, how many meetings that we schedule going forward, and I don't know what that is, Chris, you may be able to ballpark this in your head, but I don't think that 50 chairs are gonna do it.
Well,
I think you're gonna need to go somewhere else, and I don't think it's in this room. I mean, we couldn't even hardly hold people in the last council meeting, so perhaps we need to think strategically from a staff side where these conversations should occur. You know, and if it's bi-directional or not bi-directional, whatever it might be.
We'll have to look at the comments we get. I don't want this to become some kind of free-for-all. We have to have structure, but I do think that, given the timeline, we need to be,
I agree with
very orderly. yeah.
But I'm looking at that sign right there, that might be a good place to do it. The tides.
You know,
So-
Mr. Mayor, first of all, we obviously need, and we want to continue to get public input. The council up here are the representatives of the constituents. Ultimately, we've got to make the decision for where we're going, up or down, left or right, with each of the recommendations. We welcome and need to know what the constituents feel, obviously, but by the same token, we gotta continue to conduct business, and it can't always be, like you use bi-directional as a term, Doc, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to make the decisions and make the votes. It does not have to be in a.
With the exception of the ordinance.
And
Well,
represent.
well, we also need to make sure that we're making productive comments, productive
I agree.
statements.
You're the governor of that, so, and I think I completely agree, again, with both what was just said by Mr. Pink.
Set a date, you know,
So-
collect public input for a couple of weeks, and say in 2 weeks, we'll have the first public meeting.
So I'll get you some dates and we'll move forward.
Yeah, I think that's great.
All right,
Thank you.
thank y'all for coming.
So, the next meeting, and we're gonna, as soon as we settle the date, we'll push it out. The next meeting is where we're gonna be asking everyone to state or restate your concern, complaint, issue, questions about the current STR regulations. How it's impacted you, what you want to change, what you want to keep. That's what we're gonna be asking for, so we can put it all together and give to these guys.
So I guess to go back to the first question is, are we creating a date right now, or are you gonna get back
I'm
to
gonna
us for
get
the
you
next
some
meeting?
dates, because I want to make sure we get as many people here.
Okay, okay.
We're good.
Real quick, Karen, did you say the study needs to be done by September?
More or less. These are all
No, I just was,
Yeah.
I couldn't hear that.
Because when the study comes back, city council would have to say, these are the effects of our proposals, which ones do we wanna adopt?
Right, this was my turn.
Yeah.
You should know when I came in.
In that meeting, we'll be speaking, or you want us to email or?
Oh, no, that one, I think that one, there'll definitely be a public comment.
Yeah, we'll do public comments. And in the meantime, if you have specific instances that you want to address, please email those to us so that we can kind of start getting that information together. All right.
Is it possible to get a copy of this?
It'll be posted on the internet.
Well,
It's over by the door too, as you walk out.
oh, well, then, thank you.
All right, thank y'all.